So, we've had the summer break for Formula One, and there's been a heap of breaking news happening. And because I'm such a big legal dummy, big legal dum dum, I thought I'd better enlist some help, some much needed help. So, joining me, new friend of the show and mine, is the wonderful Lindsay. How are you, Lindsay?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Absolute pleasure to have you on the show. So, I guess you know more than me about legal stuff, but what can you tell us about yourself, but also what your background is in terms of legal stuff, motorsport stuff, and how they come together.
Yeah, so I have been a practicing attorney for almost 3 years now, which is crazy to say. And that almost perfectly coincides with the amount of time that I have been watching Formula One. I started watching Drive to Survive in after the 2021 season. First full season watching F1 was 2022. And I noticed like a real lack of some like legal content creators in the motorsport space, especially when the whole Alpine Oscar contract debacle happened. And I felt like nobody was talking about the legal implications of it in the way that they should. And so I thought, hey, maybe I'll just start talking to myself and posting it on the internet and see if people find interest in this like weird cross section the way that I do.
No, absolutely. I mean, there's never any shortage of legal issues to delve into. Sometimes controversies, sometimes not controversial, but legal for sure. And I mean, it's one of those things that when you start getting into, I guess, motorsport more broadly, but especially Formula One, these things happen and they come from out of the blue, and your favorite driver gets disqualified, or your team gets completely thrown out of the championship, and you go, "What is this about?" And if you have a curious mind, which is one of the things that got me into Formula One, was what's the politics here? What is why? Like, someone explain to me why this is going on. So if you have a legal mind as well, that would be extra helpful in decoding some of that stuff.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun. I think during last summer break, I kind of started going through like past historic, infamous controversies and kind of the implications of that. So that was a fun way to also learn more about the sport and also see that it's a lot more tame than it used to be,
What? Yeah, no
which is kind
kidding.
of
I mean,
crazy. From the Spygate and Crashgate days, it's like what we have today seems like nothing.
I did a video recently because when it was announced that Flavio Briatore was coming back, I went, "I'll do a video about his past controversies," and I had to cut it down, and it was still 20 minutes long.
Yeah. So
Boy,
maybe we're going back towards the absolute
maybe
mayhem days with him being back in the sport.
there have absolutely been some legal stories of late, and for me, they really run kind of from top to bottom, all the way from involving the FIA, which was the first one where I was like, "Oh boy, I really need to get my head around this one." Also, some team stuff, and then also content creator stuff. So maybe even we go in that order if that makes sense. But the first thing that came onto my radar, and I was like, "Oh, let's talk about that one," was this investigation from the DOJ in the US into, I guess it's Formula One management, what they're trying to do, what their intention is, and whose side they're really on. Where do you even start with this one? Because I sort of understand at a low level what the thinking is, but I don't understand what the intention is.
So, United States antitrust law is very complicated,
Oh,
and I am
good.
by no means an expert, but the general idea behind antitrust law is that the government it wants to protect the American people from what they see as bad business practices, which usually includes some sort of monopolization. There's a lot more like causes of action, I guess, that can fall under antitrust, but the one that everybody thinks of is monopolies. So there was this congressional investigation into the like F1 management and Liberty Media because of their initial refusal to admit the Andretti Cadillac bid. And it was actually bipartisan, which for the United States these days is rare, but the everybody kind of knew that it was not about Andretti and all about Cadillac. Like it was all just lobbying and pandering to the auto industry and showing the auto industry that like, look, we're going to stick up for you. And
So can I
oh,
ask, when you say
yeah.
that politicians were lobbying to the auto industry, is there not also a case to be made that it was the other way around?
Well, yeah, but it's, I guess lobbying was probably the incorrect word, but just making a show for the auto
Yeah,
industry and
doing their
saying
bidding.
like, look, yeah, look, if you want somebody who's going to stick up for the auto industry, like I'm your guy, I'm your
Yeah.
girl sort of
And
thing.
both sides of politics wanted to be that person, and it was such an
Yeah.
obvious target and an easy target.
Yeah, I don't think that they were fooling anybody when they made this big stink, because it's like, oh, Cadillac, a subsidiary of the biggest car manufacturer in the United States. Of course, they want to try to show them that we're taking this seriously,
Yeah.
even though I'm sure most of them, the congressmen and women who were involved in that, had never even heard of Formula One. So with this actual investigation, this is more of like a precursor to the Department of Justice actually bringing a legal case, but it's them doing all the fact finding they need to see if they even have something that's actionable in the first place. So they, in theory, will get access to whatever internal communications were being sent back and forth in making that decision to refuse Andretti, all of that. And they're going to determine whether they think that F1, in an effort to protect the monopoly, so to speak, of the current 10 teams, sacrificed providing consumers, particularly American consumers, with an inferior product. So, like, is having 10 teams on the grid an inferior viewing product to having 11 teams? And I
But
think that that can go a lot of different ways. And
yep.
that is where, like, a lot of, there are some very pro Andretti people. I'm not necessarily one of them. I think 11 teams would be great, but I think I don't want it to be 11 teams and have that 11th team be another, no offense to Sauber. I
um,
want it to be another at least midfield team. And I
that makes
think that's,
sense.
yeah, I don't think it's
Just
a better product if you have another back marker.
fair enough. That's totally valid, and I think a lot of other teams see it that way too, especially when they have to share some of their earnings with them, or at
Yeah.
least have that team prove that they will substantially grow the pie enough that no one will lose, which it seems that they couldn't do. And that, I mean, one of the reasons it seems to have been given for them not being successfully entered is that they proved Formula One is better for you than you are for Formula One, and unfortunately, with that equation and the teams having as much power as they have, this isn't going to happen, and it's hard to see anything changing on that front. Number one, but also number two, I mean, this just unpicking this legal side of things, which is like there's this phenomenon that seems to happen in Congress and in the US, which because of the whole last 10 years, us in Australia have had to learn a lot more about US politics than we wanted to. But it seems like Congress has the power to just launch investigations really without any proof. It's to find the proof. And then if we find proof, well, then we'll launch a case. Is that, have I got that right? It doesn't seem right.
Yeah, I mean, the congressional arm of things is definitely a little more liberal in the way they can do that. And I mean liberal, not in the political side sense, but just in the generous. There we go.
Sure.
That's probably a better way. I don't want to pin Congress as being one way or the other,
That's fine.
but generous in the way that they just like throw investigations out there. But with the Department of Justice, that it's because the antitrust, like what you need to make a good antitrust case, is so specific. And nobody is going out in the open saying, yes, we're doing this anti-competitive thing with our
Yeah.
business. They need to have some sort of investigative function that helps them at least get a little bit of the facts, so that, like, they're not, I mean, I think many would argue that this is a waste of US taxpayer dollars, but not wasting more taxpayer dollars by going out and bringing all of these cases, which are much more expensive than just the investigations, when there may not be anything there in the first place.
Yeah. So this feels like it's early days. It feels like
Oh,
something else will
yes.
probably come from this. So, I mean, for sure, this is not to say we know right now how this is all going to play out, which is fine. But it feels as though, and I gather from the things that you've posted out and videos you've made about this, that you probably think it'll amount to nothing. But in the meantime, a lot of taxpayer money is going to get spent, but also in the meantime, information may come out. And I guess is one of the hopes that, hey, if you don't want those business secret backdoor business deals to come to light, you might want to have further discussions with us or treat us nicer or whatever. Is there sort of an idea of we can apply pressure that way?
I think that if anything, what we will have is a more transparent process for teams wanting to join F1, but in the addition way, not the
Yeah,
buying way, moving
sure.
forward. Because presumably, at the bare minimum, even if the Department of Justice decides, yes, everything you did was all acceptable, you had legitimate business justifications, and the conclusion that you made about adding an 11th team, not making F1 better, is a sound conclusion. We will at least know what F1 considered when making that decision. I think we have an idea, but I think what will come out is a more clear cut, like, set of standards, which will help an Andretti. I'm trying to think of what other teams. There were some like F2 organizations that sponsored F2 teams, like those will help those teams move forward and
Yeah,
like the future potentially for saying, okay, this is the criteria that we need to meet if we want to make it into the sport.
yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Um, the other funny part of it is, someone in the US legal system deciding whether or not including or excluding another US team in I mean, let's just call it a European sport. It's a global sport,
Yeah.
even global. Like it's like the jurisdiction here seems like a bit questionable. How do you define these things?
I guess the reason that they're able to do this is because Liberty Media is an American company and Liberty Media owns F1 as the brand. And they were ultimately the ones that were involved in this side of the Andretti decision because, as we know, the FIA said from a technical perspective, Andretti was all clear. So if Liberty Media were European, Australian, what have you, we wouldn't be here.
Well, I guess
That's
you could
it.
argue
It's
that
as
that's good or
simple as
bad.
that. It's as simple as that. If it's just because they're based in the United States, even though Formula One is all overseas for the
Sure.
most part.
All right. Well, all right. I don't, maybe this is a case that will be, will develop over time if there's some serious, substantial, meaningful developments. I'll invite you back on and we'll have another chat about it. But that would be we can rule a line under that issue there, I think, because
Yeah,
like we
I
say,
think
it's early days.
it's going to be at least 6 months, probably closer to a year to 2 years, just to get through this investigation. So
Okay.
this is going to be a very long, drawn out process, if anything even comes of it.
Well, as I mentioned, this other issue, which if anything happens, it will happen rapidly, is one step down from the FIA, the teams, and it's come to light in the last few days that there's trouble a brewing for Haas concerning former business associates from what feels like 20 years ago, but was really only a couple of years ago. Russian sponsors that well, they didn't pull out. They were shown the door because of things that happened in Russia and geopolitical situations escalating. But they say you didn't pay us back the money that we prepaid to you or whatever the arrangement was. And because you didn't do that and you're in the Netherlands, we might just seize those cars and you may not be able to leave the country with any of your stuff and you may not race at the next race. Is that overblowing that situation?
I mean, from a pure, like, this is what's happening standpoint, that is correct. I think what I think what has happened, or my guess as to what has happened, is that Gene Haas has been kind of slow rolling this repayment because, as we all know as F1 fans, Gene Haas does not like to spend his money, but I think he has the money to repay. I think he just doesn't want to do it and was kind of waiting for somebody to force him to do it. And this is
Hmm.
going to be it. And I know Haas has made statements that they're not concerned. The money is going to be repaid by the end of the weekend. But I think that Gene just needed a little bit of a nudge to say, no, you actually need to do this or you're going to face some consequence. And the consequence would be quite comical, if you ask me, because I just think the fact that like somebody from like Mazepin's crew showed up with court bailiffs and they're just walking around the paddock taking inventory of everything. Like, I wish I could be there to see those scenes because it has to be hilarious. But I think that the risk is probably very low. But then again, when Haas is involved, you never know because they seem to always get mixed up in the craziest of scenarios.
They definitely need, like, not even their own episode in Drive to Survive. They need their own series about,
Oh yeah.
especially surviving in a sport like this.
Like I'm
And it is,
envisioning an off the office level. I don't know if you guys I know there's the UK version, the US one, but just like the way that's all filmed with like the side eye looks between the team members,
yes.
like that's how I'm envisioning like a Haas docuseries
And it's
looking.
funny to think of a Mazepin representative showing up in the paddock and they're like, I represent Nikita Mazepin. And they're like, who? What? Never. Does anyone know Nikita
Yeah.
Mazepin? Never heard of him. The Russian driver. No, there's no Russian drivers, mate.
Did you mean Daniel Kvyat? Like they would go back to
Yes.
like not
Yeah.
even like
Hasn't been
just
around for
completely
a
skip over him.
while.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. If you watch Drive to Survive, if all you know about Nikita Mazepin you saw from Drive to Survive, you probably think he's an alright driver. He held his own.
I mean, people are talking about him coming back, or we're talking about him coming back to take that second Alpine seat. I guess those rumors are officially squashed, but that was what they're like. The F1 rumor mill has gone too far because there's no way Nikita Mazepin is getting back into this sport.
It has been fully cooked this year, and especially in the driver market. And people say, "Oh, the silly season hasn't gotten that silly," but I'm like, man, not according to the rumors that I've been seeing.
Oh no,
Um,
absolutely not.
okay, so we're assuming and imagining that this debt will get paid, and probably that they were going to pay the whole time. I don't really understand. I mean, I don't know what the logic would be behind. You have this deadline, you have to pay the money by this deadline, or there will be consequences, and they just don't do it. Maybe it just, I don't know. Maybe they were just waiting. Like sometimes you wait for your paycheck to go in before you pay your rent, something like that. It's weird to think about it just on that, but on a scale of like tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah, I think, I mean, maybe he wasn't intending on paying. I was just going to see what extent Mazepin would go to get the money back. Like a, you're going to have to make me sort of thing. Because as we know, that
Don't get it.
relationship, even before it terminated, was not always the best. So
No.
I'm sure there's just a lot of hard feelings between those two parties.
But I mean, Formula One rocking up to the next race with only 9 teams would be a bad look, to say the least, on the
Oh,
level
yeah.
of like Williams not being able to run 2 cars on a race weekend. Going back, I don't know how far back you want to go back or think back, but like, I mean, because it happened in Melbourne, it's so fresh in my memory of like Geert van der Gaard taking the team to court saying, no, I'm getting in one of those seats. And he was putting on
Yeah.
suits and getting ready to get in the car. And they're all like, we don't know who this guy is.
Yeah.
I mean,
It
Formula
would
One just
not be.
doesn't fail to deliver on that level, if you ask me.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Not that I think Haas is going to be, or anybody thinks Haas is going to be competitive at Monza anyway. So maybe it won't even matter.
Maybe it
It
won't.
won't matter if they show up or not.
Well, I'll tell you something that does matter and has caused a huge ripple in the Formula One fandom, content creator space, online space, has been, speaking of Liberty Media, our favorite people, this crackdown on content creators and people with brand identities that they've been building themselves, sometimes recently, sometimes for a long time. And it's one of those things where I feel like I'm always behind the 8 ball because I just am juggling so much in my life all the time. But I logged in and people were saying, you're probably seeing all your favorite content creators are changing their names today. And I was like, I hadn't seen that, but I've seen you reacting to that. So I guess now I'm clued in. So I'm always slow to this. But do you have any thoughts or memories of how that day played out when we logged in and the online space was changed?
I had started to see some rumblings for like probably a week or so before about people were talking about cease and desist letters, and it was all very ominous. And then I do feel like there was one day where it hit where everybody started to change their usernames and basically remove F1 or Formula One in any way, shape, or form from their online personas. And so, as I mentioned, cease and desist letters. Liberty Media was sending out letters to primarily monetized creators saying that they were going to be held liable for trademark infringement if they did not remove F1 or whatever iteration of that they had in their portfolios because they were using, or their portfolios profiles, because they were using F1 trademarks to build and profit off personal brands.
So, I mean, we'll get to like, who's changed their handles recently and who hasn't, but because ours has stayed the same. It shows where we're at with our monetization. But I mean, this happened, and I can remember it happening nearly 10 years ago, where there was a huge stink about a crackdown on social media, cracking down on anybody whose name had Formula One in it. Everyone's name was changing from blank Formula One to blank Grand Prix or some more generic sort of title. And it caused a big stir, especially back then. This, I mean, it's hard to think back to what it was like 10 years ago, but this was before the teams were posting video clips and TikToks or whatever. No one had any access to anything that was happening in the paddock whatsoever. It was all completely a walled garden and everything. It was behind a big paywall because everyone was charging so much money. And they cracked down on it. And a few things were kicking around in the sphere at the time. One was that movie Rush, and then this big social media crackdown, and then all of a sudden, a few months later, oh, we're selling the sport to Liberty Media, and it's like, well, that at least that sort of makes some sense. So we went through that cycle, and now Liberty Media has been around for a little while. Maybe they want to keep running the sport for a long time. Maybe they are looking forward to some kind of sale. Maybe they just want to juice whatever they can in terms of monetization and partnerships and just fan dollars because this Formula One movie is so expensive. They want to like capitalize and maximize that. I don't really know, but I feel like this is just, there are so many signs that history is repeating here. The crackdown on content creators, and maybe they're going to sell. There's a F1 movie in the mix. It feels just like we're back 10 years ago. But there was a huge stink back then. The first time that I went through that kind of cycle of they're trying to shut down Twitter. It was Twitter back then. They
Yeah.
just want to shut down Twitter. They don't want Formula One on Twitter. They hate Twitter. They don't want anything to do with it because the sport's run by 80-year-olds. This time it doesn't feel quite like that, but it did take us a little while to go through the impact. Oh my God, my favorite creators are having to change. Oh my God, they're trying to rip the money out of my favorite content creators' pocket. And then after a couple of days, things calmed down. Everyone took a little bit of a breath and went, oh, it's maybe not as bad as we thought, but it is maybe not a good look for them. Is that sort of, I don't know what your read on that is, but is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, I think from a legal perspective, this is something that happens all the time. And I think as more time has passed, more people have been coming out. People who are early adopters in the content creation space are saying, I got a cease and desist from Liberty Media 2, 3, 4 years ago. So this is something that has been happening. I think within the last year, we have seen content creation in the F1 space just blow up significantly. And so they probably just weren't able to stay on top of it like they were. And so they probably took some time to build up their list. And then we're just like, okay, we're going to do one massive campaign. And from a legal perspective, trademarks is one of those like weird things where if you don't enforce your trademarks against the small fish, which would be content creators in this case, you can't go out and enforce your trademarks against the big fish because
Interesting.
if you have all hundreds of thousands of content creators, let's just say, using your trademarks online to build their personal brands, their use of that is essentially diluting the power of that trademark. So then when they go to enforce it against somebody else, they say, okay, sure, that's fine, but you've let X, Y, and Z people do it. So your trademark really has no value anymore. And I think that's the pickle that F1 found themselves in. And when you're going to enforce your intellectual property against someone, there's not really a nice way to do it.
No.
And so I think you also get mixed views from people who have gotten these letters as to whether they thought everything was very informative, respectful, and people who found them to be a little more hostile. And I think that is just a matter of personal perception. But I don't see, there being another way to do it that would have been equally as effective, even though maybe it would have been nicer for it to happen in a different way. There
Yeah.
just really isn't another way. That's the problem.
A lot of people have been posting their like deeply emotional, deeply unfiltered thoughts and feelings on videos on social media to say, FOM should have done this, Liberty should have done that. Why aren't they consulting with people? Why aren't they building connections rather than putting up barriers? Why aren't they looking to offer ways for content creators to do more official partnerships? If they're so supportive of content creators, why are they coming down so hard on us? Why aren't they doing this? Why aren't they doing that? There wasn't, in the immediate aftermath of this sort of peak action, there doesn't seem to have been a lot of acknowledgement of, well, they're sort of within their rights though, and they're sort of,
Yeah.
we were sort of the ones in the wrong here.
And I think that you can acknowledge that F1 needs to do more to embrace the content creator economy, but also recognize that you don't necessarily want F1 officially partnering with your favorite content creator, because I had some conversations like offline with several other like content creators in the space, and we were just saying that people don't realize that if F1 is licensing out F1 or Formula One to your favorite content creator to use in their profile, then they have a say in what that person posts. You're going to lose the unfiltered aspect from that person, because everything that they're going to be saying and doing online is going to have to go through F1. They're no longer going to be able to talk about IndyCar or Formula E because they'll have some exclusivity with Formula One. Like, you don't want F1 licensing their name out to your favorite creators, because I think the quality of the content that you would get from that goes down. Does F1 need to do more with inviting creators to races, or just giving creators access like creators can get at like IndyCar races? 100%. But I think that's a different conversation outside of the IP. And I think the IP has at least gotten people talking about that. But I think from the trademark side, it's best we all change our names and move on.
Yeah, and I mean, for sure, for some people who have spent years building up a following and building a brand and pitching themselves out to partnerships and so on to say, do you want to reach a Formula One audience? Because we offer that. And here's our rate. You want to reach, 30,000 people? We'll charge you X amount of dollars per 30,000 people. One of the problems that I sort of feel that has arisen out of this is that the Liberty Media era has been great in terms of they did open the floodgates to that social media exposure. They understood the value of reaching their fans directly and empowering the teams and drivers to do the same thing. Doesn't matter if you're in the paddock. Go and film a TikTok if you want. That's fantastic. I mean, I would even argue maybe that the things have swung too far that way, where instead of getting insights about the races, we have to watch the drivers, name their favorite ice creams or play games. It's turning into like the sort of the James Corden show a little bit too much, in my opinion. But, the other thing that's happened is Liberty Media is endorsing and through other media channels saying, well, now we are going to have YouTube highlights. We're going to have official podcasts. We're going to do all kinds of partnerships. And so when there's an official Formula One partnership, which has sponsors, going up against an unofficial podcast or an unendorsed, unlicensed podcast, reaching similar audiences, now all of a sudden, if you're a sponsor, you get to choose and you go, well, I could partner with Formula One. That's great. I could partner with this content creator. That's also great. The content creator is charging me $100 per 1,000 people that I'll reach, but FOM is charging me 3 times that. Well, maybe that affects the decisions. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. I might be reading too much into that, but it's now become a game where it's Formula One versus content creators for the battle of the eyeballs, right? So, I mean, I wondered whether that was part of it. It may not be, of course, but you don't like. A lot of people made this very valid point that Formula One management doesn't need to go enforcing their trademark the way that they did, or could have handled it better. Could have started by introducing more official ways to partner with Formula One if that's what people want to do, and if they want to, they can do that. But I just see that there's this fundamental struggle that we have now and will probably go on and only get worse as media breaks down from being television rights to all kinds of ways that we interact with teams and drivers. And the more Liberty Media like engross themselves into those different channels, and the more the content creators are living side by side with them on those same channels, these problems are, maybe they might not get worse, but they're not going to go away entirely.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to see how this continues to play out because I think, unfortunately, we're still at the spot where any sort of collaboration between content creators and F1 comes at the team level. It's the teams that are inviting creators to the paddock, it's the teams that are going out and trying to do these special marketing campaigns with their sponsors and different content creators. So I think we can only hope that as that continues to grow, that maybe F1 will say, okay, we need to get in on this, but you never know.
And when you raised that point before about if you don't go after the little guys, you can't really faithfully, in good faith, go after the medium sized guys. Do you think that there's any targets in mind, or is that just a broad observation about how these things work?
That's just a broad observation about how things work. You mentioned the F1 movie, and I don't think that is insignificant, especially considering they gave Brad Pitt the license to name the movie F1.
Oh, yeah. They're deeply involved.
And not just like name the movie F1, the F1 logo with the registered trademark.
It's absurd.
So I don't think it's a coincidence that that movie's coming out in about a year, let's say. I don't know the exact release date, but I think it's next summer. And they're trying to tighten up the strength of their trademarks and IP rights. Don't think that there's a huge coincidence there. And I think most people have come to recognize, oh yeah, maybe the two might be related.
It's a nice roundish kind of number. I think it's a roughly a year away. So for them to be like, well, if it was 217 days, if it was 1.49 years away, it would be different. But it's almost to the letter a year, which it has.
Yeah, and I'd imagine they're going to start ramping up their marketing, all of that very soon.
Well, if they're going to sell T-shirts with Brad Pitt's photo on them or whatever, they're not going to want those T-shirts to sit next to, someone like me who just designs a T-shirt with Daniel Ricciardo's name and face on it and competing for those dollars, right?
Yeah.
Well, look, I don't want to be too tinfoil hat and make too much of that, but I just wondered whether that, especially because it's on my mind how expensive that movie is and how important it's going to be for them to recoup some of that investment. I'm sure we're going to see all kinds of Sunny Hayes merch and everything under the sun that there can possibly be.
And it wouldn't surprise me if the movie team said, hey, we're paying X amount of money to be able to use F1 as the name. We better be getting as much value out of that as possible.
Yeah. I did wonder not to say that obviously Liberty are within their rights to enforce their trademark, but I did wonder whether there was any other people or marketing bodies or investors nudging them that way to say, look, you're asking us to invest in this, but we would really like to see you take these actions. And they might have had to weigh up, well, look, we do really want you to come on board and help us promote this Formula One movie that we are really pushing hard. But if what we have to do that is crack down on some content creators, well, fine, we'll do that.
Yeah, I'm sure that's exactly how certain conversations went.
Maybe it's because I went through it, back in the day, and maybe it's because since then I've tried to be a little bit more careful. But my immediate reaction when I saw all of these posts coming out saying, oh, this has happened and we've had to change our name and all the rest of it, I was like, look, it'll be okay.
Yeah.
But my immediate reaction was just like, just take a minute. Just take a minute to think about it. And, everything will come out in the wash. One of the reasons I was so I'd already wrestled with this because I'd had personal experience in the past of designing like a T-shirt and throwing it online and being like, aha, this is funny. And having someone send me a thing saying, you can't do that and take it down and it's wrong. And even though I felt like, well, the design I had done was like, it mentioned the driver's name, but it was sort of a bit more of a broader story. But because it mentioned the driver's name, that driver sent a message through to the people selling the shirts to say, you can't do that. And I was like, I'm not even interested in fighting this for the dozens of dollars that I make every year selling the shirt. But I mean, it was just like, fair point. Like, you are who you are. You've invested trillions of dollars in your brand, and I've invested basically nothing in mine. So, like, I don't even mind. It worries me when I mean, not it worries me, but it annoys me talking about going after the small fish. You can go to websites right now, those sort of upload a logo and print a sticker kind of websites, where
Yeah.
someone just takes the Formula One logo, not even their own design, but just takes it and uploads it and sells it as a sticker for $4. That still seems to be online. So I would like to see
Yeah.
it go further down and get those really malicious people.
I don't even understand how that kind of stuff makes it like stays on these online shops. Like I know before my dad and I went to our first F1 race a few summers ago, he didn't want to like he didn't like the F1 merch that was out there. So he's like, "Let me see if I can like design my own McLaren shirt on like one of those just
Yeah.
like screen printing websites and then like get my own like custom shirt." And they wouldn't print it for him because he had like the McLaren logo. So I don't understand how you can't do that, but then there's these Etsy shops
Yeah.
selling Ferrari, McLaren shirts with just like completely in the stylized font with the logos, all of that are still up and running. So that I'm not sure about. And I would like to think that that is going to be the next part of the crackdown if it hasn't been a little bit cracked down on a little bit already, but who knows?
I mean, literally from a justice point of view, it's like, well, I can understand people going, well, I made my own design. I drew this picture of Lando Norris or
Yeah.
whoever, and I just want to have it on a t-shirt. I kind of don't even mind that. I'm sure the drivers probably don't even care either, but it's when people basically just rip off official looking designs and put them on
Yeah.
a t-shirt, because
Yeah.
if you go to the driver's site or the team's site, it might be $120, but you could buy it on Redbubble for $30, and then somebody who ripped off that design makes several dollars. I mean, that's just. I mean, I know that there are sometimes automatic filters that are like looking for keywords, probably not scanning designs, although that may be coming. And people who are trying to get into that sort of SEO, if I just put the exact right keywords and label it the exact right way, McLaren fans will find my Lando Norris t-shirt and buy it. And it's just the official design. But I mean, it seems like those are the first people that I'd be going after, if anybody, and just scraping all of those sites, getting rid of all of that junk. Because then when you go to I mean, talk about working your way up. Then when you go to fabulous Formula One fans and say, hey, I'm sorry, but you can't have Formula One in your name. And look what we've just spent the last month doing is like scraping the bottom of the barrel to get rid of all the crud. Then it feels a little bit more justified.
I think one of the reasons they probably didn't do that is because most of the online merch problem isn't F1, it's teams, like we were saying. It's teams, it's drivers. Like, I don't think while there are people selling just like things with the F1 logo, that's not necessarily what most people are looking for when they go online trying to find cheaper F1 or team related merchandise. So I think that in terms of like what they perceived as a problem, that was probably more insignificant. And it's not their problem to enforce the trademark rights of the teams. It's not their problem to track down people selling Ferrari and McLaren merchandise online. So I think, like, I mean, I have seen like F1 shirts on Etsy, but I don't know who's really buying just like a shirt with the F1 logo on it. I haven't seen, I mean, they sell them at the races. I haven't seen anybody buy them.
Yeah, well, that's fair. I mean, yeah, that's definitely true. It's something that we get here at the races too, where you can go to all of the fantastic like team stands, and then there's just a generic Formula One stand, and it's like you could buy a Ferrari cap for $80, or for $20 you can get one that just says Australian Grand Prix. It's like, well, yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool, but the value probably represents the appeal in that sense. But at least it's all official, right?
Yeah.
The other thing that I saw, which was part of the reaction to that sort of peak takedown activity, was it wasn't framed as they're going after content creators that are monetizing for FOM's registered trademark. It was never framed that way. It was always they're coming after content creators with Formula One in their name, which seemed to me like that was part of it. But the bigger part and the more accurate way of, you know, uh, characterizing that was they're going after content creators that are in a way that's unofficial and illegally, you know, monetizing their trademark. And by the time they go and engage a lawyer and send out a cease and desist letter, they're not going to just say, you can't have the name Formula One in your podcast and have ads in it. Please just change the name of your podcast. They're going to go through that whole brand identity and demand every little thing that they think they can get away with in terms of asking. That's why I didn't get asked to change my account and take F Formula One out of it. And for now, I'm happy to keep it there. If I do get a letter, I'll just take it out. It's fine. But because I'm not really monetizing to that degree, it feels like I'm just not a target. So on the one hand, they seem to want to, like the people reacting to this sort of action, were wanting to stir up the passions and say, look what they're trying to do. They're trying to silence us, all the fans and all the content creators who are just doing it for their own, for doing it for the passion, doing it off their own bat. They're not, officially getting paid by Formula One or anything, but they're trying to keep us down. They're kind of trying to oppress us. When really what was happening was we're just going, like, because you have a commercial thing going on here, probably the people who are getting to the point where they could subsidize their income quite handily, going after those people, but saying you have to take the big steps, but also all these little steps. And that was when it started to become more visible and probably hurt a bit more for those people too. Don't know, because it didn't happen to me. I don't know, but that was my
Yeah.
impression.
I mean, it didn't happen to me either, but I felt like I could not legitimately go online and talk about this in this way and the way that I did on TikTok and Instagram and Threads with F1 in my handle. So like just to maintain a sense of legitimacy, I was like, you know what? This is how it is. When I made my account, I didn't think that F1 was enforcing their trademark rights, which they weren't at the time, because there were already a ton of other content creators with F1 in their name. And so I looked at that and said, they don't care about enforcing their rights. It's kind of like a pack mentality. If they're letting everybody else get away with it, then sure, why not? And at that point, I had no idea whether that was going to be something I was doing for a month and just dropped it, or continued to do for it's been like a year and a half now. But yeah, I changed it more just because I mean, would like to be monetized someday, but I was like, I can't talk about this with F1 being in my username. I need to make it more generic. But the people that have just like random, like their only presence on social media is like on Threads or Twitter, and they have F1 in their name, like that's not the people that F1 cares about. Maybe they are. Maybe attacking monetized creators was just the first step, but I think that was deliberate in a way that they kind of knew that it might have, like, to an extent, a trickle down effect to people like me who are at an intermediate level where they have a decent following, but they aren't monetized. So I really don't know whether it's something that they're going to continue to go after, but I think there was a bit of an overreaction from a lot of people who have nothing to be concerned about.
Yeah, probably. There's also, I mean, every content creator who is leveraging the Formula One trademarks is probably doing it to a different degree as well. So, like I say, if you're selling a t shirt that has the Formula One logo on it, that's one thing. If you are selling a t shirt design that mentions Formula One but expresses something that isn't just infringing on a trademark, there are like cases where that's acceptable. And I mean, I'd fully admit that I don't totally understand that. But it's not to say you can't talk about Formula One. And I guess you could argue that a t shirt design, in some cases, would be argued that that's a form of speech, right? The problem is you can't just represent it as you're just buying a Formula One t shirt, you're just buying it from me instead of someone who owns the trademark. So there's shades of gray in between the extremes, right?
Yeah, fair use basically allows you to talk about Formula One and use Formula One trademarks in speech, commentary, written materials, all of that, and not get sued for trademark infringement just because you mentioned Formula One in an article that you wrote or a video that you post or a podcast that you make. That is kind of the crux of fair use in the trademark context. When you get into the t-shirts, I think it gets a little more gray, like if you have some sort of saying that has Formula One in it. But yeah, that is much more acceptable than, or much more likely to be considered a fair use than someone selling a shirt as if it's an official F1 shirt, or using F1 to identify their personal brand at, like, as a content creator.
Yeah, and that's to say as well, just to side with the content creators for 1 second, there are probably some people where it's a more of a black and white decision. You are actually genuinely infringing on trademark here. There's probably other cases, people who were sent cease and desist letters and had to take, corrective action on their side, where it was probably more murky and their use of Formula One was probably a little bit more, well, less directly infringy, to use that word. So
Yeah,
some of them who feel aggrieved, that they probably have something of a reason to feel aggrieved.
yeah. But I think overall, it seems like for the most part, the community has kind of, I don't want to say come to their senses, but just process the emotion, let it subside. And as a whole, we are kind of moving on, and also accepting the reality that most F1 content creators weren't just talking about F1 anymore. So when you think of it from that perspective, the rebrands to so and so motorsports probably makes sense, because these people have been going to IndyCar races, they've been going to Formula E races. They're not just talking about F1 anymore, even though that was the niche that we all found ourselves creating in when we all first started.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, we're finding an equilibrium again in social media, and especially, I mean, I'm pretty much only on Threads, but you know, what was I going to say? Something along the lines of everything is sort of correcting, and the people who were at first up in arms saying we're trying to be silenced and we won't have our names anymore, they're still around, and everyone's
Yeah.
saying, well, I put F1 in my username so that people found me, and it's like, well, maybe some of them did, but if it was as easy as that, everyone would do it, and everyone would have a million followers. So it still falls back to those fundamentals of you have to be making good quality content that people want, and if you do that, they will follow you, whether your name is blank Formula One or blank racing day enthusiast or whatever generic term you
Yeah.
land on. So the key remains for all the content creators out there, like us and like everyone else, you've still got to make good content at the end of the day.
Yeah. And you have to make the algorithm work for you. And that's not just
Yes.
about your name.
That's so much fun having to do
Oh,
that.
my favorite part.
Maybe, I mean, thank you so much for going in depth a little bit more on that one in particular, because that was the core one that affects us directly, but also
Yeah.
I was more interested in. But I wonder, just because I don't want to keep you too much longer, but is there any other issues I haven't sort of thought to ask you about? Areas of interest for you in particular, bigger things, smaller things that that occupy your day to day thoughts as a lawyer slash Formula One slash motor racing enthusiast.
I'm keeping my eye on those dueling lawsuits between Gunther Steiner and Haas. They're
One
kind
of my
of
favorite
in
topics.
the like limbo period right now, where they're just probably sitting waiting to get picked up. So we haven't really heard much since they were initially filed, but I think that has the potential to be a really nasty legal battle. But it's Gunther and Jean, so it'll be entertaining, at least, because
Yeah.
we know those two are characters.
Yeah, I was literally going to use that word. They're both characters. They're both hard to get a read on in terms of who might be in the right. I maybe suspect that Gunther might be slightly more in the right, just because the responses and defenses that I've heard put up are pretty weak sauce. But I
Yeah,
mean,
I read
Gene can
the
only afford to dole out so many millions of dollars to people every month.
I read the countersuit that Gene filed, which is basically also having to do with like trademark infringement. And I thought,
Yeah, ironically.
okay, this is a little far fetched.
Yeah,
So I
and
think that whether which side prevails in Gunther's original lawsuit, I'm not so sure, because that's basically just a contract dispute. But I think that Gene's suit definitely leans more in Gunther's favor, for just like posting pictures of Haas in your book that you wrote when you were employed by the team is not trademark infringement. Like posting a picture of the car, that's not how it works.
well, I mean, maybe I don't know what Gene's handle is on TikTok or whatever, but maybe if his name was Gene F1, he would be learning the same hard lesson that we're all learning about trademark
Yes,
infringement and
everybody has
enforcement.
learned about intellectual property in these last few weeks, which that's like the area of law that I actually do specialize in. So I was like, I'm glad that everybody as a whole is having this lesson. It's an important lesson for people to learn.
Well, let me move us towards wrapping up here by flashing this on the screen. I believe this is your handle. Is this your new
Yes,
handle
this is
everywhere?
my correct. This is my new handle everywhere. So Threads, Instagram, and TikTok.
All the good ones.
Yeah.
It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for making the time. I'll let you go and enjoy qualifying. We're recording this right before qualifying, so we're all excited. And yeah, hopefully we'll talk to you again soon. And hopefully there's good legal stories to talk about, maybe for a change next time.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I had a lot of fun.